Hello students, my name is Abhishek Sudhir. Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we'll be discussing paper number 4, Civil and Political Rights, and module number 3, Genesis of the Right to Freedom of Religion in India. The members of the Constituent Assembly of India were elected to draft a constitution for the newly independent Indian nation. They began the demanding task of drafting the Constitution on December 9, 1946, and concluded on November 26, 1949. Much of the deliberations focused on freedom of religion and conscience, and they took place on the 3rd and 6th of December, way back in 1948. This module will give you an overview of some of those fascinating debates that took place on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. The module will help you understand the genesis of Article 25 of the current Constitution of India, numbered as Article 19 when the discussions were taking place on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. Article 25 guarantees to each individual the right to freedom of conscience and free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. This module will tell you how the article was drafted and why some of the clauses that are in the present Article 25 came to be. The learning outcomes of this module are twofold. The first outcome, the first objective rather, is to give the students an overview of the Constituent Assembly debates with regard to freedom of religion and conscience. The second objective is to help the students understand the manner in which the right to freedom of religion and conscience is protected by the Constitution of India. Article 25 states freedom of conscience and free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. Subject to public order, morality, and health, and to other provisions of this part, all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience and the right freely to profess, practice, and propagate religion. Nothing in this article shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law A. Regulating or restricting any economic, financial, political, or other secular activity which may be associated with religious practice. B. Providing for social welfare and reform or the throwing open of Hindu religious institutions of a public character to all classes and sections of Hindus. Now, the article also has an explanation. Explanation 1. The wearing and carrying of kirpans shall be deemed to be included in the profession of the Sikh religion. Explanation 2, in subclause B of a reference to Hindus shall be construed as including a reference to persons professing the Sikh, Jain or Buddhist religion, and the reference to Hindu religious institutions shall be construed accordingly. Now, that's a very long and complex article. You're probably a little confused right now, but I guarantee you that that confusion will be cleared up by the end of this module. Let us now look at the drafting history to actually understand some of the various provisions in Article 25. The right to practice of religion was a subject of great debate on the floor of the Constituent Assembly that framed India's constitution. Tajammul Hussain was a member of the assembly from Bihar. He wanted to disallow marks, dress, or even names which indicated the religion of a person so as to ensure, in his view, a cosmopolitan, secular society. Perhaps this brings to mind France, where this is in play. In France, a child who goes to school cannot have any religious marks. A woman on the street cannot wear a hijab or a burqa if she belongs to the Islamic faith. Tajammul Hussain wanted something similar in India. The way Tajammul Hussain rationalized this was he said that if there are no marks, there are no distinguishing unique features that a person that can be attributed to a particular religion, then all people in his eyes would be treated as citizens of this great country and not members of a particular religious faith. The other great debate, of course, was on the Uniform Civil Code. For those of you who are unaware, India does not have a uniform civil code. What this means is India does not have uniform laws of marriage, inheritance, succession, among other things. Members of the Muslim community have certain specific laws, Mohammedan law, that apply to them. Members of the Hindu community have Hindu laws, like the Hindu Marriage Act and the Hindu Succession Act, that apply to them. And then there are a set of secular, if you will, laws that apply to the general populace that does not profess the Hindu or the Muslim faith. At this point, it's worth noting that the word Hindu encompasses those who are Jains and Buddhists, and as well as Sikhs. Mehboob Ali Beg brought this issue to the floor of the assembly. He wanted to incorporate personal laws within religious freedom. Nazaruddin Ahmad and Bahadur, Pakar Sahib Bahadur, collectively opposed the incorporation of Article 44 of the Constitution, which imposed upon the state an obligation to endeavor for a uniform civil code. The stage was set for a bitter battle on the uniform civil code. Pakar Sahib Bahadur went to the extent of calling the implementation of the uniform civil code as tyrannical. He said it would be nothing short of an assault on the religious freedom of the minorities. It was Kanhaiya Maneklal Munshi, one of the key architects of the Constitution, who came out in defense of a uniform civil code. He took the examples of countries such as Egypt and Turkey, which had traditionally been secular, if you will, Islamic nations. What that essentially means is, despite having a majority of the population following the Islamic faith, the state still had no religion. Kanhaiya Maneklal Munshi also cited the importance of power being given to the legislature to bring social reforms through secular legislation. What Mr. Munshi is trying to get at here is that a uniform civil code would, by very definition, be progressive and not regressive in nature, given the fact that the personal laws of certain communities were based on outdated notions of gender and caste. The demand for the inclusion of personal laws within the ambit of the right to practice religion was raised on several occasions. Muhammad Ismail Sahib, another member of the Constituent Assembly, argued that the observance of such laws is confined only to particular communities that adhere to these personal laws and does not affect the society at large. What Ismail Sahib is trying to say is that if you give an individual the right to follow his personal laws, it in no way impairs the collective right, if you will, of other individuals to follow personal laws of their own choice. So Ismail Sahib saw absolutely no problem with having personal laws being included within the ambit of religious freedom. In the opinion of Ismail Sahib, many Hindus also wanted to retain their personal laws. Qazi Said Karimuddin and Maulana Hasrat Mohani, two other Muslim members of the assembly, argued that Muslim personal laws were derived from the Holy Quran and was a part of the Islamic religion itself. See what Qazi Said Karimuddin and Maulana Hasrat Mohani are trying to stress here. They are trying to say that the Muslim personal law, having been derived directly from the Quran, holds much more significance and will always be more significant and important than any man-made law, if you will. It was Anantasayanam Iyengar who eventually managed to set aside the concerns of the Muslim members. Here's what Anantasayanam Iyengar said. He spoke of adequate safeguards already present in the Constitution. He argued that in an advanced society, even Muslims may want to amend their personal laws, but won't be able to do so if observance of personal laws are protected as a fundamental right, and thus such a proposal could not be accepted. A little bit of an understanding of the justiciable nature of fundamental rights is necessary here. If an individual is granted the right to follow his personal law as a fundamental right, what that essentially means is that the state can make no law that abridges this individual's right to follow that personal law. So let us take the example of the UCC itself. If there was a binding positive obligation on the state to draft and implement a uniform civil code, and at the same time an individual had the right to his or her personal law, then the uniform civil code would become per se unconstitutional. Therefore, a civil code which basically says that marriage is a union between one man and one woman would be fundamentally opposed to Mohammedan law, where marriage is not a union between one man and a woman and is more in the nature of a contract that is capable of being entered into by one man with more than one woman. Therefore, if you would give a Muslim citizen of this country the right to his personal law within the ambit of Article 25 that guaranteed religious freedom, then any law such as the Uniform Civil Code, would become per se unconstitutional, as it would be a violation of that Muslim citizen's right to follow his own personal law and marry within the ambit and the scope and the limits of Mohammedan law, which, as some members had pointed out, was derived directly from the Holy Quran. Now, B.R. Ambedkar, perhaps the principal architect of the Constitution, also expressed his concerns that the process of social reform would be hindered if personal laws cannot be abrogated. B.R. Ambedkar, belonging to the depressed classes, was acutely aware of the prejudicial nature of many of the Hindu laws and the evils of the caste system, and this is probably what he was alluding to. He also alluded to some of the evil practices associated with religion. Apart from personal laws, another matter that occupied the Assembly's time was the treatment of women by India's major religions. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur voiced these concerns, and she did so with the support of Hansa Mehta, who some of you might be interested to know was the founding director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, or AIIMS, in Delhi. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, along with Hansa Mehta, regularly raised the issue of the conflict of the right to practice religion with anti-social customs that had the sanction of religion. Let us take the example of sati itself. Some could argue that the practice of a woman throwing herself into the funeral pyre upon her husband's death was very integral to the Hindu faith. Now, sati was abolished by the British, but would the practice of sati be made constitutional in the newly democratic Republic of India? If the right to practice religion was guaranteed, according to Amrit Kaur and Hansa Mehta, such evil practices probably would have to be permissible. It was the persistent efforts of these two formidable women, Hansa Mehta and Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, that the freedom of religion was made subject to social welfare and reform. Now, if we go back to the original clause, you will see that Parliament is not stopped, right? Parliament can make laws for the betterment of the weaker sections of Indian society. Therefore, the right to practice one's religion is limited in the interests of social welfare and reform. Now, another interesting subject matter was how to accommodate the Sikh community. The Sikh community, a cardinal part of their faith, is the right to bear a weapon. The weapon, of course, being a kirpan. After extensive debate and deliberations, the provision on freedom of religion was adopted by consensus. Every demand, irrespective from which religious faction, was given a patient hearing, and every demand which did not go against the secular character, and more importantly, the legislature's prerogative to carry out social reform, was adopted. All comers were welcome. They were all heard. All of them were given a patient hearing, but not all of them were given the rights that they demanded. One right, however, that was granted in an act of great generosity was to the Sikh community. The right of the Sikh community to wear and carry kirpans is explicitly guaranteed by the Constitution, which goes to show the amount of pains that the framers took in listening to the concerns of each community in India. Now, coming to the bogey of conversion. Conversion is a subject that has captured the nation's imagination for decades. And in the last 12 to 18 months, this subject has been in the news. The earliest debates on the right to propagate one's religion can trace its roots to Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi made what many consider a somewhat controversial statement on conversion. Every nation, said the Mahatma, considers its own faith to be as good as that of any other. Certainly, the great faiths held by the people of India are adequate for her people. India stands in no need of conversions from one faith to another, said the Mahatma. Mahatma Gandhi was very clear in his mind. He felt that conversion was best avoided. The attitude of many Constituent Assembly members towards conversion was no different, and few held sympathy for the cause of the minority Christians who considered propagation as a basic tenet of their religion. At this point, let us try and define propagation. What propagation essentially means is if you believe in the Christian faith, then you propagate your faith. by saying that Jesus Christ is the one true Lord and Savior. This propagation sometimes is considered to be in conflict with the right to practice one's religion of other individuals, because when one individual says his Lord is the only Lord and his Savior is the only Savior, then does he not impinge upon the right of other individuals to freely practice their faith? It was this split, it was this issue that was front and center of the debates on the right to propagate religion. Those opposing the provision believed that religion, being a private affair of an individual, should not be allowed to be propagated, as it will only lead to a nuisance. The secular character of the state, with the right to freely exercise religion, was also given as another reason for not granting an individual the right to propagate his or her religion. Now, the arguments here are somewhat confused. Those opposing the provision felt that religion was a private affair. But is it truly a private affair? If we look around our country, we have temples and mosques and churches. We have large religious congregations and gatherings, be it the Kumbh Mela or the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. The secular character of the state was also invoked, and they said that if the state, or rather the state through the constitution, was to grant an individual the right to propagate his or her religion, the secular character might be affected. All of these arguments were considered and countered by the proponents of the provision. On the other hand, the proponents, the supporters of the right to propagate one's religion, saw it not in the context of religious freedom, but rather as being symbolic of religious toleration. They said that if one member of a particular community felt the need to praise his Savior, his Lord, he should be allowed to do so. And it would be an act of tolerance on the part of members of the other community to give him a patient hearing or not give him a patient hearing, but to stop him from saying that his Lord is the one true Savior would be intolerant. The supporters of the right to propagate clause argued that the right to propagate was already implicit. It was already present in the right to speech and expression, which we will cover later, and the right was being misinterpreted as a right to convert. This is interesting. In the last 12 months, certain organizations have embarked on a project of conversion, converting members of one faith to another. And they have essentially said that they are simply propagating religion and there is a right to convert. Now, the question for consideration here is there a right to convert? The Supreme Court, as we shall see later, has held otherwise. But it would be very difficult to argue that there is no right to convert, because essentially the logical consequence of propagation is conversion. Think about it. If one individual was to go from door to door propagating his religion and saying that his Lord was the one true Savior, then he would perhaps want the individual he was propagating this to join his faith. Now, it was this concern that the Constituent Assembly wanted to address. The conversion question continued to dog the Assembly. In fact, another article was explicitly intended to put into the Constitution, which barred conversion from one religion to another brought about by coercion or undue influence. Now, this is again an issue that has been debated across the nation in the last 12 months. Forcible conversions. But it was felt that there was no need for such a provision in the Constitution because forcible conversions were already illegal under the present laws of the Indian Penal Code. Therefore, it all boiled down to this. Majority of the members of the Congress party, according to Purushottam Das Tandon, were against the right to propagate religion and were quite vocal regarding the same. Purushottam Das Tandon went to the extent of saying that the Congress as a whole is against the idea of allowing conversion. And he said that just to appease the Christian community, their demands were given into, and the right to propagate was included. The views of Purushottam Das Tandon found support from the likes of Balkrishan Sharma, Jagat Narayan Lal, and various other members of Congress. Now, the man who pretty much settled the debate on propagation was T.T. Krishnamachari, the stalwart from Madras, who was part of Nehru's first cabinet. T.T. Krishnamachari, he spoke passionately about how Christian missionaries had played a vital role in India in terms of improving health, education, and other facilities. Interestingly enough, T.T. Krishnamachari himself went to a Christian school. He diversified the debate. He went beyond the mere propagation and conversion rhetoric and said that conversion was a powerful tool in the hands of a scheduled caste or a scheduled tribe Hindu to gain equal status and opportunity in India's caste-based society. What T.T. Krishnamachari essentially was trying to say was, let us take the case of a member of the scheduled caste community. He is approached by the member of another faith who tells him that if he joins his faith, he will be treated as an equal in every respect, something that will never happen if he remained a Hindu. T.T. Krishnamachari said such an individual could essentially pull himself out of his oppressed state by converting to another faith, thereby escaping the rigidity of India's caste system. It was T.T. Krishnamachari, the stalwart from Madras and a member of Nehru's first cabinet, who settled the debate conclusively. It was his defense of propagation that seemed to turn the mood of the assembly. T.T. Krishnamachari spoke passionately about how Christian missionaries had played a vital role in India in terms of improving health, education, and other facilities. He himself went to a Christian school. He also diversified the debate, going beyond the mere rhetoric, and held conversion up as a powerful tool in the hands of a scheduled caste or scheduled tribe Hindu to gain equal status and opportunity in India's caste-based society. According to TTK, by depriving a scheduled caste member of his right to convert to another faith, you were essentially consigning him to a life of oppression due to the rigidity of India's caste system. Another approach was suggested by Loknath Mishra, who, while in favor of the propagation of religion, was against it being made a fundamental right. Mishra essentially wanted to say, look, let someone propagate their religion, but to make it a fundamental right would be to put it on a pedestal. Rohini Kumar Chaudhary was also in favor of a right to propagate as long as it was not exercised in a manner whereby it was used to criticize other religions. But as I've already explained to you, by saying your Lord is your Savior, and He is the one true Savior, it is inevitably going to lead to the criticism of another religion, even if it was not intended. Let's now go to T.T. Krishnamachari's speech, one of the most powerful speeches in the history of the Constituent Assembly debates. Here's what he said. An untouchable who became a Christian became an equal in every matter along with the high caste Hindu. And if we remove the need to obtain that particular advantage that he might probably get, it is undoubtedly a very important advantage, apart from the fact that he has faith in the religion itself. Well, the incentive for anybody to become a Christian will probably not exist. Munshi himself moved an amendment in May 1947 that would have imposed a constitutional bar against conversions engineered by fraud, coercion, or undue influence. But by December 1948, there had been a marked change in his attitude, as he had been party to many of the compromises that were thrashed out with the leaders and organizations that represented the minorities. Mr. Munshi admitted that these negotiations ultimately led to many of these clauses pertaining to religious freedom being inserted in the Constitution. It's interesting to note that Mr. Munshi went on to join the Bharatiya Janata Party's predecessor, the Jan Sangh, and chaired the very first meeting of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, to an organization that has been at the forefront of the conversion debate. Mr. Munshi was no doubt still wary of forced conversions and the possibility of such conversions taking place as a result of the right to propagate being constitutionally guaranteed. But Munshi said that it was a compromise that everyone had to make their peace with. To quote him, Munshi believed that the inclusion of the word propagation had created an atmosphere of harmony and confidence in the majority community. In the end, the right to propagate religion was retained as is, thereby demonstrating the inclusiveness of India's constitution. The majority saw the particular right as a detrimental right, yet included the same, keeping in mind the interests of the minorities. Every effort, once again, was made to incorporate the belief of each of India's major religions. This is further evidenced by the fact that there was, on more than one occasion, an early adjournment of assembly proceedings. Interestingly enough, when one of the most vitriolic speeches against Islam was being made on the floor of the assembly, the Speaker of the House, the President rather, Rajendra Prasad, interrupted the member and said that as it was Friday, it was time to adjourn the assembly proceedings early so that the Muslim members of the community could offer prayers to the Almighty, once again demonstrating the farsightedness and liberalism of the founding fathers of this country. With the discussion on religious freedom, the question of God kept cropping up. The issue was first raised by the Reverend Jerome de Souza, who noticed the absence of God in the Constitution. He opined that even if the state derives its authority from individuals, the ultimate authority still remains with God, and the citizenry must believe in the authority of God. Thus, he asserted that God should be included in the Constitution, a word that had been conspicuously been left out. The view taken by the Reverend was not a unanimous one, however. Another member, Guptanath Singh, in this regard held a diametrically opposite view and argued that state is above all gods and is the God of gods, as it is the ultimate representative of the nation and citizenry. The battle lines were drawn. Then it was Pandit Govind Malviya, son of the late Madan Mohan Malviya. Suggestions were made by several notable members, including Malviya, who wanted to include God in the preamble itself. Instead of saying, "We the people of India," they wanted it to start with, "We the people of India in the name of God." N. Madhava, in this regard, explained that God and other things cannot be imported into the Constitution unless they are germane to its purpose and are accepted by the Constituent Assembly. Essentially, N. Madhava was trying to say that yes, it's all well and good saying God must be in the Constitution, but what purpose does the word God and the presence of the word God serve in the Constitution? One last attempt was made by an ardent believer, H.V. Kamath, who introduced an amendment to include God in the preamble. Kamath was asked whether such an amendment would go against the right of non-believers. He argued that this amendment was not for individuals, but for the people of India as a whole. Kamath's amendment was criticized for imposing a narrow sectarian spirit, and he was asked to withdraw his amendment and not to put the assembly in the embarrassing situation of voting upon God. This represents one of the closest votes in the history of the Constituent Assembly, and by a very small margin, the amendment was negatived, and God was not included in the preamble, much to the chagrin and disappointment of Mr. H.V. Kamath. Another major debate emerged when Kamath proposed an amendment whereby the President would take the oath of office in the name of God. He considered an oath or an affirmation to be an empty performance, as long as it was not made in the name of God. Mahavir Tyagi suggested an amendment to Mr. Kamath's already proposed amendment, which offered the non-believers in God to solemnly affirm rather than swear in the name of God. Eventually, Mahavir Tyagi's amendment was accepted by the Assembly, with certain changes, such as God should precede solemn affirmation in the proposed article. But the discussion that followed provides a clear picture of what were the views of the framers on God. Opponents still criticized it as, in their opinion, when performing a secular function such as governing the country, there is no need to invoke God. However, a majority of the framers were of the view that merely invoking God does not make the state communal, but at the same time, not mentioning God whatsoever would not amount to God's banishment. Essentially, a lot of them felt that this whole debate about God was much ado about nothing. Finally, God was included in the oath, and last year, when the new government of the 16th Lok Sabha took over, majority of the members of parliament and almost every single member of the new Council of Ministers, i.e. the cabinet, took the oath of office in the name of God. So students, at this stage, let's recap what we've learned in this module. The debates in the Constitution have clearly indicated that the framers considered religious liberties to be subservient to other fundamental liberties, while some of them even believed that as time progressed, the role of religion would become minimal in India. While many of them wanted to grant religious freedom and were happy to do so, they hoped that India would grow more secular, whereas some members felt secularism and a belief in God could coexist. Despite the assembly being dominated by members with deep religious conviction, the rights of atheists and agnostics and the likes were taken into consideration, as evidenced by the oath of office, which allows you not to take the oath in the name of God. It is abundantly clear that the framers did not believe in a nation that was devoid of religion, but they didn't believe in a theocratic state either. They believed a nation that treated all religions equally, a belief they embodied in India's constitution.